Hello there all you absolutely magnificent people, and welcome back to another episode of An Ecologist Plays. We talk about nature while playing games. My name is Will, I'm an ecologist by training, and today we are back in a bit of a hidden gem in terms of gaming. This is SimSafari, released in 1998 by Maxis, and it is apparently a game that a lot of my colleagues actually played when they were younger, and I myself have many fond memories of this game. Now we're trying to build a good national park somewhere in Africa and trying to have as much biodiversity as possible. Now unfortunately at the moment we are in a bit of a drought. As you can see there, water has been drying up, and as a result a lot of plants also have been dying, especially the trees seem to be hard knocked. We've got knob thorns over here, leadwood, most of them have died, some of them are still alive as you can see along here. The grasses are actually doing surprisingly well, where I believe we are currently still in the rainy season, but we are heading towards the dry season, and then the grass sward over here will go from green to a bit more brownish yellowish color. Now as you can see, we also have a lot of herbivores in our park here, mostly grazers, because well, grasses are dominating this landscape. It is a bit of an open savanna that we have here, so your bulk grazers like your zebra over here, they're doing very well. Also the white rhinos, surprisingly well. We actually have quite a few of them in the park here, charging towards us there. We've got 23 of them in our park over here, which is absolutely marvelous. And there we go, we actually now are in the dry season. Technically the winter thorns over here would now have their leaves, not actually drop it now, because a lot of other trees are actually dropping the leaves in the drier season, which is winter, and then winter thorns, these trees over here, would actually have their leaves. So I don't know why they are dropping their leaves in winter, but anyway, let's not complain too much about that. Now the white rhino over here, also sometimes called the square-lipped rhino, the mouth there is quite wide, and they use that wide mouth there to actually feed on grasses. They are grazers, they lower their head quite low down, they usually also walk with their heads kind of lowered, and they generally also have longer horns than the black rhino, the other rhino species in Africa, would have. But unfortunately, of course, the rhinos here are heavily poached, and they are dropping in numbers again. In South Africa, back in the day, in the 1970s, 1980s, their numbers dropped tremendously, and there was a massive effort to try and conserve them in a few select national parks. In the Shishliwi-Mfolozi Reserve, in Kruger National Park, and in some other select reserves, they were protected, and then eventually reintroduced into areas from where they previously disappeared. And now again, many of those populations are under threat. Poaching for their horn, mainly used either in ceremonies or in traditional medicine, a variety of things it's used for, all of it actually kind of nonsense and resulting in this amazing tanky unicorn going extinct. And that is really sad. This is Future World just quickly popping in to mention that one of the ways that poachers use to actually find out where to get rhinos to poach is by using social media. Especially if you have a geotagged photo of a rhino out on the internet, on Facebook or wherever, the poachers will then use that as a way to figure out where they can go poach rhinos. So if you ever do photograph rhinos, please do make sure that you don't have any references of where it was photographed, otherwise that rhino may actually be in danger. There have been many cases of especially smaller reserves being hit quite hard, and especially now in recent years, a lot of those reserves have asked their guests to not photograph or post the photos of rhinos that they see during their safaris. So just something to keep in mind if you ever do go out and find a rhino. Alright, now back to past Will for some happier things. On a lighter note, we also have a large population of warthogs over here. 37 of them. Okay, also mostly confined to this northern section of the reserve. It actually seems that a lot of our animals are very patchily distributed. We've got a lot of zebras here in the north, a lot of warthogs, a lot of rhinos, also quite a lot of cheetahs in this section of the park. Not so much in the lower sections here. You can see we have got a lot of Thompson's gazelle, we've got a lot of wildebeest, blue wildebeest here, also surprisingly quite a few rhinos and some zebras of course as well, because well, this is a grassland, this is perfect habitat for your typical grazers. Now what you find in places like the Serengeti is some sort of resource partitioning. Now all of these animals here, well, except for the cheetahs of course, all of these animals are feeding on the grasses, but they tend to feed on the grasses at different times when the grasses are different lengths. The zebra will generally come in first. They are what we call bulk grazers, and the hindgut fermenters. Hindgut fermenters have a horrible digestive system. They're basically little sausage machines. They put in food and the food comes out not as well digested. Ruminants, animals that actually have 4 stomach chambers, like your wildebeest here, like your Thompson's gazelles, like your impala there, they tend to have better digestion, so they break down the food more effectively and they get more nutrients from the food. The hindgut fermenters, rhino is also a good example of a hindgut fermenter. They can survive on lower quality food as long as there is a lot of food available. So what the zebra tend to feed on, and the rhinos, the white rhinos here also tend to feed on those, would be taller grasses, very often drier grasses that are relatively low in nutritional value. They tend to graze on those. That opens up the grasslands for animals like the blue wildebeest here that will then come through, and they feed on the shorter, slightly more nutritional grasses. When they have gone through the system, there is another antelope species that comes through, feeding on the bases of the grasses. That's known as the topi. And in South Africa, we've got the tsessebe, which looks like that. And it's very similar in appearance and very closely related to the topi of the Serengeti. And they feed on the most nutritional parts of the grasses. And then after they have come through, the Thompson's gazelles come through and they feed on forbs, small little herbaceous plants growing amongst the grasses. So they then feed on the most nutritious plants growing in the area. And so over time, you've got zebras, wildebeest, topi, and Thompson's gazelle all moving through the system, feeding on the grass sward and the other herbaceous plants in that area, but feeding on it at different times when the grasses are different lengths. So even though they're all feeding on grasses, there's this resource partitioning. There's less competition between them in this ecosystem. And I just think that is absolutely amazing. Now, I think our savanna hare population, yeah, it is actually increasing quite a bit. If we have a look here, our savanna hare population indeed has increased quite a bit. Now, it is experiencing seasonal fluctuations. During the wet season, when there's an abundance of food, they are reproducing, so the numbers go up. During the dry season, when there's a bit more of a shortage of food, their numbers go down. And I believe we are about to head into the wet season indeed again, so the population will most likely now again increase. As long as they are, and there we go, I think they just increased. Actually, all of them had babies. There we go, 104 of them. Suddenly, their population has spiked again. So we will need to have a look at how to control their numbers. In general, as long as we've got carnivores, they will control their numbers to some extent. Some vulture species may also go for them. Eagles also will, and then also snakes. Now, the only snakes we can actually place in here would be the black mamba. So we are going to introduce some of them. They definitely would be feeding on some of these smaller hares, the babies. We're just going to release some of these black mambas. And there we go, the black mamba. Shown in a tree here. Now you would imagine maybe they won't occur in trees, but black mambas are actually very adept climbers. They will be living up in trees as well. They spend a lot of time on the ground, but they also tend to find shelter in crevices in trees, little holes in the trees, or just kind of chill on the branches like this. Now in the clip here, it actually does appear very dark in color. They actually are not black in color. They are a lighter gray in color, almost more like the monitor lizard we see over there. But it is called the black mamba because when they open their mouth, the inside of the mouth is dark, almost black in color, and that is where they get their name from. Now we just introduced the snakes, and there is a predator of the snakes right over here. This is the secretary bird, Sagittarius serpentarius. Well, there is only one on the reserve at the moment. And there it is walking along. Now it is called the secretary bird because it looks like a secretary that has put a whole bunch of pens behind their ear there, those quills there, those feathers. And they do hunt snakes. They're very good at killing snakes. They will use their long legs to kick snakes to death, but they can also use that to kick locusts and all kinds of other smaller animals like hares. They would also be going for little rodents, snakes, lizards, frogs, whatever they can get, they will be feeding on. And they tend to kick it to death with their long legs and then snatch it up and tear it apart. Amazing birds. Beautiful, beautiful birds. There we go. There is a secretary bird still walking over there. They can fly. They do, however, spend a lot of time on the ground, rather walking than flying. Flying takes a lot of energy. Oh, and she was just eaten by the leopard over there. Well, now we have no more secretary birds in the park. That is very, very sad. And there we go. We have had another drought, and this is actually kind of bad now. I think a lot of our water holes are very dry now. Unfortunately, this poor Nile crocodile over here, I think it is also, it's the only one in the park. Now, this does not appear to be a Nile crocodile. This almost looks more like a mugger crocodile. The Nile crocodiles have a more slender snout. This poor one over here, we need to help. We need to increase its habitat a bit. So we are going to plop down a bit of water here. And of course, that does take a bit of money. And I did say we're not going to interfere too much. But I don't see this as too much interference. I think this is necessary to keep things like the Nile crocodile here alive. Now, crocodiles, very, very good ambush predators. They'll be spending most of their time not actually swimming, but rather either basking on the water's edge, or they will be lying motionless underwater with just their nostrils and their eyes peeking out. If we have a look there, we're just going to wait for the video to stop playing. You can see that the eyes and the nostrils located at the top of the head. That is perfect. It means that they can actually be underwater with just the nostrils above the water to actually breathe and the eyes above the water to look out for prey animals. And if a prey animal comes close to the water's edge, these guys can lunge up to about 2 meters out of the water to grab their prey. And then they slam shut with their jaws with a force of about 2,000 kilograms per square centimeter. It is an incredible force that they slam it shut with, and good luck getting out of that grip if they have grabbed onto you. So we've got one crocodile that is, it's something. We can potentially also introduce some more crocodiles, but you know what? I'm actually going to, especially along here, where we've got lots of grasses next to the water's edge here, we are going to introduce hippos. Just one pot of hippos, and you know what? We are also going to just increase the water available to them. There we go. Now, the hippos are mostly herbivorous, although there are some arguments to be made that maybe they actually are semi-omnivorous, because they will occasionally feed on meat. So they have been known to kill antelope running into the water here. Very often the prey animals will run away from things like wild dogs. They try to take refuge in the water, and then there have been records of hippos coming up to them and then just kind of drowning them and then eating them. They have got massive teeth. Let's see if we can see those teeth. No, we can't see it in action there with that one. That is a cow feeding on the grasses there. There we go. There's a bull displaying. So you can see as it opens its mouth there, massive canines there. They will use those massive teeth when they're fighting with one another. They can inflict tremendous wounds on one another, but they also can use that to kill anything that they wanted to kill. So yeah, they are perhaps a little bit more omnivorous than we initially thought they are. Now, there are lots and lots and lots of antelope and other herbivores here in this section of the park. 152 hares. That is becoming a bit of a problem. What we are going to introduce then would be some of their main predators. We are going to introduce some martial eagles. However, martial eagles are very territorial. So we're going to introduce a breeding pair over here. We're going to introduce a breeding pair down here, or we did. We're going to introduce another breeding pair over here, and perhaps another breeding pair over here. So smaller numbers. They are relatively sparsely populated, so you'll find 2 in a very, very large area, a breeding pair in a very, very large area. Now in the game here, they're not territorial. They will fly all over the place, but we at least introduce them into their respective territories. One other creature we can also bring in, another bird, the vultures. Now these are the white-backed vultures, and they are or were the most common vulture in Africa. However, their numbers have dropped tremendously, and that is mainly due to poisoning by people for the traditional medicine, for muti, that they have been poisoned because things like the brain of the vulture are eaten, and they are used in all kinds of traditional medicine. Unfortunately, as a result, they really are dropping in number. There recently were a case of, I think, 2 poisoning events in the Kruger National Park, killing about 200 white-backed vultures. And I mean, the population is now getting so low that those 200 vultures is a massive knock to the population. Of course, they are incredibly important scavengers. They will be feeding on carcasses. Anything that the predators kill, they will come in, they will do the cleanup, the nature's garbage disposal units, and in the process then they will prevent diseases from actually spreading through the savannah. They're very good at controlling diseases. And there have been cases in, for example, India, where the population of vultures have dropped, not poisoning for traditional medicine, but rather accidental poisoning due to people using diclofenac, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug that was used on cattle to treat inflammation. And diclofenac is extremely toxic to vultures, results in organ failure, renal failure, or kidney failure in particular. And yeah, the populations in some species have dropped by 99% within a decade or 2. So that is a severe drop in number. Thankfully now, diclofenac is outlawed in most countries, so the risk of that happening again is relatively low. However, the population will take a very, very long time to recover, because these are typical what we call case-selected species. They breed very, very slowly. They have 1 egg at a time, 1 chick every year, or maybe 1 chick every second year, so the population will take a very, very long time to recover. And in India and other places where the vulture population dropped by so much, other problems started popping up. For example, rabies became more prevalent because feral dogs started moving in to feed on the carcasses that usually the vultures fed on. So the feral dog population increased in number, and along with that, more people were bitten by dogs, especially rabbit dogs, and as a result, the occurrence of rabies actually started increasing as well. So when you have things like the vultures disappearing, you tend to have a whole bunch of other, often unforeseen and horrible consequences also happening. Now, this savanna is getting knocked. It's the dry season now. There are so many herbivores here that the grasses are actually disappearing. This is perhaps an opportunity for us to start increasing the tree abundance in the savanna here. Where normally the grasses may actually outcompete the trees, now there are so many grazers that perhaps the grasses are unable to outcompete the trees, and now the trees have an opportunity to finally establish a bit. So we're going to bring in some of the more important tree species, things like marula, which have very tasty fruit that things like baboons love feeding on, and vervet monkeys and all kinds of animals will be feeding on, elephants as well. Things like the knobthorn, which has leaves that the browsers will be feeding on. And of course, trees like baobabs, which I also just love, and also produce very valuable leaves and fruit for the animals to also feed on, the browsers and the frugivores to feed on. So now we'll see, maybe these trees will now increase in abundance, maybe the grasses will recover. If, however, the population of herbivores, particularly the hares here, increase too much and get really out of hand, we are going to take more drastic measures and we are going to increase the abundance of carnivores on the reserve here. Now in this western corner over here we have quite a few trees still alive. A lot of them also did die in the last few droughts we've had, but at least some of them are still alive. Grasses, interestingly enough, have not yet spread into this area, which I do find very interesting. I think it is time to just quickly pop in here by our camp. I think it is time to expand it a bit, because we would like to have more visitors. So I think we are going to first start with another dining area, and then we're going to place some cottages here, and some tents. And of course, in both cases, they will need ablutions. And in real life, I just found a tick on me, so that is a very, very pleasant way to end the evening. But getting back to what we are doing here, you will notice that I am spacing out our buildings quite a lot. And the idea is we want to still have some wildlife in our campsite. So what we are doing is we are planting a whole bunch of trees everywhere. The idea being that birds and even monkeys can still move through this area. So yeah, even though we've got accommodation here, buildings, infrastructure, we're going to still have a lot of animals being able to move through this campsite unimpeded. Insects, birds, those types of organisms. And it's also not just one tree species or one plant species. We are planting a variety, because having more than one species will really help with the biodiversity in our camp. If we just planted one species, it becomes a monoculture, and that is really bad. In terms of biodiversity, you're not going to attract a lot of animals, so we are bringing in a whole bunch of different trees, different plants to this campsite of ours. And one thing we are also bringing in would be the aloes. Now, the aloes actually make a very, very nice flower or inflorescence, brightly colored, orangish, reddish in color. They actually will attract sunbirds, and a whole bunch of other birds will also come and drink the nectar there. So placing aloes here also will be a great way of attracting birds for people to look at when they are staying at our camp here. So there we go. Even though we've got infrastructure, we also have created a nice environment for animals to coexist with humans. And there you can see the bright red inflorescence of the aloes there. A sunbird flying over will very easily spot that and then go down to drink from the flowers there, drink the nectar that is there, and in the process pollinate the flowers, and of course the species persists. Now, along with the extra infrastructure that we have here, we're also going to bring in some more vehicles. So we're going to put in, I think, let's put in two of these 4-door vehicles, and then 2 of these little top, what do we call them? Top vans. We're going to put in as well. And of course, we need to hire more staff as well. So let's hire 3 more cooks, 5 more drivers. We're going to increase the attendance by 6, 2 more naturalists, and I think let's go for 4 more scouts as well. Now, interesting, you'll notice that the village now has a fence around the village. Oh, look at that, they also bought a tractor. I know when I popped in previously, or a little bit earlier, they were saving up for a tractor. And voila, they have got a tractor, they've got a clinic now, they've got their wells. Now, they will most likely strengthen this fence a little bit later on as they make more money. They'll put a granary down, all kinds of stuff they will still do. But for now, life is actually not too bad here. In terms of our finances, we have spent more money than we made. That is because we have spent quite a lot on buildings now, which makes sense. We are generating quite a bit of income there though, and that is going to increase a bit. Last year we made quite a lot of money. We made about as much as we have spent thus far. Checking in with our park, unfortunately it seems the herbivores, the grazers, have stuffed up this part of the park quite badly. So we are currently in the dry season, so it is looking a little bit worse for wear, worse than it normally would, but the grasses, the grass sward is gone. That is due to overgrazing, which kind of makes sense. Oh, we also have two of our vehicles deciding that, you know what, it'll be fun to drive off-road a bit. So let's... No, you've got to go back. Come on, go back. There we go. Trying to get them back onto the main road. And there we go, finally. Now that is one of the problems that you can expect to happen if you don't actually have grasses or good grass cover. The vehicles just for some reason drive off the road and then they're like, oh no, I am stuck now. Now luckily it does not appear to have happened anywhere else. And interestingly enough, yes, we have very little grass cover here, but there are some parts of the park that actually still has quite a lot of grass, like this section over here. And look what we've got here. Lots of wildebeest, lots of rhinos. The animals seem to have moved off into the area where there is a lot of food for them. So there where there are still lots of grasses, we also have lots of grazers still. And wow, the rhinos are doing extremely well. 81 rhinos, that is just amazing. And 136 wildebeest, wow. Zebras, how many have we got? 76, also quite a lot. So it's turning into a bit of a mini Serengeti over here, which I'm absolutely there for. What happened to our savanna hare population? Look at that crash. That is, let's see, you know, I'm not sure what caused that drop there. We introduced the predators around here. Yes, the population started going down then, but I think it may actually be more a case of the grasses becoming less due to overgrazing, and as a result then the hare population dropped down quite a bit. That does appear to have been the case. Unfortunately, yeah, this grassland area over here has become quite barren. Maybe what we can do is we can create a bit of a lake. And what we have created here is a very shallow lake. Actually, it's mostly shallow in the middle. There is a bit of deeper water all around here. And what we can introduce into this shallow pan over here is a bird that loves shallow water, the greater flamingo. These birds will also fly, but if you place them in the shallow water, they actually sit there and they filter feed. And here you can see how they do that. They lower their head into the water, and then what they do when they have lowered their head is actually move their tongue, and in the process they pump water in and out of their mouth, and they filter food particles out of the water with special filters in their beaks there, special hair-like structures in their beak there. And that then filters out the food that they will be feeding on. Crustaceans and all kinds of other little smaller organisms, algae and stuff like that as well. And of course, flamingos here get their very nice pink plumage from the food that they eat, from the beta-carotene in the crustaceans and other things they eat. If they didn't get those compounds in, they would actually just be pure white in color. But they get that bright pink color from their food. And it may be a way for them to actually indicate how healthy they are, how well they are feeding. Brighter pink indicates, yeah, I've got a lot of food, you know, so try to breed with me. It's a good way to attract a partner, perhaps. Alright, so it does seem though that the herbivore population is out of control a bit. Oh, we also had a bit of poaching here. Let's just remove that carcass there. So let us introduce some predators. I would like to bring in a pack of spotted hyenas over here. Let's introduce another pack of spotted hyenas over here. And you know what, even here in the south, a bit of a smaller pack because there are fewer herbivores in this area than in this western section over here. We're also going to bring in, I think, some lions. Yes, lions and hyenas really don't like one another, but we're going to introduce a pride of lions here. So In terms of lions, the area, the territory, the size of the territory is very often dependent on how predictable food is within that territory. In areas where food is more sporadic or unpredictable, they tend to have larger territories in order to ensure that somewhere in their territory there will be enough food for them to survive. The number of individuals within the pride will then be dependent on how many prey animals there actually are. So in this case, there's a lot of animals, and it seems as though they're not really migrating. They are staying in one spot. So we can actually have quite large prides, and we can have the prides spaced quite closely together because food is predictable. Now, interestingly, we just have male lions over here. We don't actually have any lionesses, so I'm not sure how the species is going to continue existing. Here we are going to have a smaller pride though, which is going to have a larger territory because there are fewer prey animals, and it seems as though the animals are actually moving through a bit more and actually not staying in this area. They're moving around a bit more. Here again, lots of food, and it seems to be quite constant, so we can introduce a big pride over there. Also another pride over here. Now the lion population is taken care of. I think we can also bring in a few leopards here and there. Leopards tend to do best in areas where you actually have got some trees. So we're not going to put them out in the open. They prefer having some shelter. So let's bring them into this area, I think, again. And then here in this part, maybe we'll have a male and a female here. Also some nice cover over here. Maybe we can have 2 leopards in this area as well. And you know what, there is a lot of vegetation cover or tree cover over here. Nice dense vegetation, so there can be quite a few leopards in this section, this northern section of the reserve. So we're going to introduce a few as well. And then lastly, we'll introduce a few more cheetahs as well. Cheetahs tend to prefer the open plains. We have a coalition of 3 males over here. Females tend to be more solitary, so we're going to place 1 female down there. Unfortunately, very close to the lions. And lions very often do kill cheetahs. Not the best place for that cheetah. Another one over here. And they can even be in... Oh, right next to the lion, shame. They can even be in very open country as well. Even in arid savanna, you can find cheetahs. Let's make another coalition of 3 cheetahs over there. And then 1 more over here. Wow, the grazers really have eaten the grasses that there's almost nothing left here. But even the trees are dying. It's just that everything is hammering the vegetation. And one last carnivore I want to bring in. Packs of wild dogs. African painted dogs, they're also called. Lycon pictus. They do occur in relatively big packs, very tight-knit group. With the alpha male and alpha female reproducing. There's a solitary one. You know what? You need some friends. Everybody needs a few friends. But I mean, look at this. Absolutely stunning dog. The wild dogs. Unfortunately persecuted by humans because, you know, especially in areas where there are game farms and they've got valuable game animals, color morphs of animals, for example, of antelope species, for example. They don't want wild dogs eating their antelope, also cattle and sheep and stuff like that. Those farmers also tend to persecute predators such as the wild dog or the painted dog, as they are preferably called nowadays. So we tend to not find them outside of conservation areas. They only really exist within conservation areas. And even then, very often they are killed by predators such as lions, so they're not having a great time in conservation areas either. I absolutely love the fact that you can have these population graphs here. Let's have a look quickly. Wildebeest really peaked there. Plain zebra also peaked. And then they started dropping a bit. And then they started increasing again. This first drop, which was about 5 months ago, that was when the food actually dropped in abundance. If we have a look at, let's say, Bermuda grass, as orange here, you can see around about 7 months ago, that started dropping. And that started disappearing, so that was due to the overgrazing. And then around that time, or shortly after that time, the prey population also dropped. Then they did recover, but you can see here, now that we've introduced some predators like the lions over here, their numbers also are going down. And what is interesting to note, white rhinos, for the first time now, are above both wildebeest and plain zebra in terms of numbers. And well, the hippo population in our pond over here in hippo pools has also increased quite a bit. I am really surprised by that. So now things are looking slightly different. The grasses have recovered here in the southwestern part of the park, but the eastern part of the park has basically no vegetation. The animals here are either dying or moving away and are now concentrating in the northern and western section of the park. It is very likely that now this section will actually become overgrazed, and then the animals will start moving back to this section after this has recovered. If that is indeed the case, we basically have migration taking place in this park. And it kind of simulates what happens in places like the Serengeti, where the animals congregate in certain areas during the rainy season, and as the dry season rolls around, the grasses there become less palatable, becomes not nice to eat, and the animals move to a different area. They then move to this area, for example, until this area, which doesn't have a lot of grass cover to start with, because it is a more arid region, until this area kind of has very little grass cover, and then they are forced to move to another area, moving to this area over here. And then the rains come in the north, and they start moving back to this section, kind of doing a loop-de-loop the whole time as a response to rainfall and food availability and food quality. It's quite possible that we are going to see something like that happening in the park here. But we are going to have to wait until next time to see whether that actually does happen. And oh my word, we've got a lot of rhino here. Alright, so this is where we are going to end today's episode, everybody. So thank you very much for joining me on a little adventure here in the African savannah. I'll be back on Tuesday with the last of the Empires of the Undergrowth episodes, for now at least. And then next Friday, I won't be back in SimSafari, but I will be back in Grounded, because Grounded 2 is coming out, and I will be playing the early access of that game. So join me next Friday then for our adventuring miniature, where we are shrunk down to the size of an ant. And let's see what amazing little critters we encounter there. Also, if you want to chat more about conservation and ecology, feel free to head on over to our Discord server. A link to that will be in the description of the video down below. And until next time, everybody, stay safe. I'll see you all soon. Cheers!